Hi everyone, I hope all you guys are doing good and are keeping well. So, today we are going to talk about the identities, the most and the key important point for any cloud based architecture mechanism or any search services which are getting used in Office 365 or with any other services. So, before we get on started with this video, let me tell you that my name is Rizwan and I am one of the senior consultants within Alif Consulting, and today I'm going to walk you through with this identities part, which is an important and a key aspect for Office 365 services. So the main thing what we need to understand first is what is an identity. What is identity? So identity is basically anything which gets in created onto any such platform, whether you're using a PaaS, a SaaS, or an information as a service. So for any other application, or even if it is an on-premises object, so there has to be an identity, a unique firm getting in attached with the specific identity. Now, what is identity? Again, it is the most important component of any organization, which has to be unique. Okay, this cannot be the one parameter wherein it would be getting an identical with any such other object. Now that cannot be literally termed as an identity in real text format, because that has its own identity, a unique identity, to be very specific. But yes, it requires, in technical terms, when we speak about this, so that specifically talks to more about authentication and authorization, because till the time these two things are being completed, these are the total dependencies on a mechanism. Now when I say authentication and authorization, so authentication is something while verifying your credentials. So if you need to validate your identity with authentication, the validation process comes into the picture, and it would check in that whether the username or the password entered for these identity matches. If it matches, then check that pass and assign him the services which he has. If the check does not get passed, it would be a failure, and that would be a failure of an identity. The second thing is authorization, that comes after the authentication. Now what is authorization? The moment the authentication gets checked and gets passed, that yes, the credentials which have been following or walking through are being correct, then authorization is the one which gives you a check-in that yes, you have the correct authority to be able to view the services you are allotted for. Let's say I have a license within Office 365 aligned to a user, which I have aligned that this user would be having a business standard license, but he'd only be able to use the email services. He should not be able to use Microsoft Teams. He should not be able to use OneDrive, SharePoint. I mean, I'm assigning the complete business standard license, but within the service plans, I've just mentioned that he should just be able to use the Exchange online features and not OneDrive, SharePoint, or Teams. So when authentication would happen, it would check that yes, the user is entering the credentials exactly correct. The email address, sorry, the UPN, the user principal name is correct, the password is correct. So authorization's job would be to which features or the licenses the person has access to, meaning it would only be aligning the access to Exchange online only, despite of I being giving the license of complete business standard. So this is called as authorization, to allow or allocate the services for which the user is used for, or the users is aligned for. So this is what identity is. And when it comes to identity, we talk about authentication and authorization. So I hope if you're able to understand what does an authentication and authorization means within an identity. So these are the three types of identities which are being supported by Office 365. So the very first and the very basic one is Office 365 Cloud Identity. Now, when we speak about identity, the only thing which should be coming through your mind would be the authentication mechanism, which again would be containing verification and validation process back at the back end of it. So, whenever I create a user in the Office Admin Center, which has its own Cloud Azure Active Directory, so what happens is there has to be some portal, some container with some protocols or with some rules where these credentials would get saved and it would be getting in access, where all these validity checks would be processed with the help from some certificates, some algorithms and stuff. We'd not be going into the deep dive as how does that mechanism works, because for us we need to be able to understand as if what are identities, how does it works with respect to these three identities, okay, and how you get a token for it. So whenever you click on you go with the cloud identity, it is basically used for the identities for small scale business or organization where people of not more than like 50 100 would prefer to use the cloud based identity, because your identity, meaning your username and passwords, everything would be stored in cloud. Okay, there is no such thing, you do not have control on it. If anything goes haywire, you need to get in contacted for the identity provider who is responsible for that. So in this case your identity provider would be Microsoft Cloud itself, where your passwords, authentication, authorization, everything would be taken care by that cloud identity, which is Office 365 Microsoft. Okay, this is a very basic level. So in the browser, when you click on portal.office.com, you get the page. Enter your username or enter your login name, your user principal name. You enter that. The second page you will get is enter the password. So these two things would be checked across. The verification and validation would be done from cloud's backend, that is Microsoft 365. Okay, the second one which comes into the picture is the synchronized identity. Now what does this means? That you have created your objects, you can get it created either on the on premises or on cloud. So but when you say synchronized identity, yes, you would be creating your objects within your local active directory with the help of a third of a tool called as AAD Connect, Azure Active Directory Connect. Now, what is the job of this AAD Connect tool? Is that tool would be the man in middle. What it would do is it would synchronize the user objects from your local Active Directory with the help of the organization unit, whichever OU you have selected in the on-premises. It would take those users to Office 365 with the help of two connectors. Those connectors are responsible to sync the values from the on-premises Active Directory to Office 365, and those values, or let's say those objects, get synchronized to Office 365, and any object which gets synchronized, locally synchronized from your local Active Directory, the complete control would be done from the on-premises side. Now I cannot say it as like a fully functional complete process in over here, because whenever you are into a synchronized identity, you have password hash, password sync, and there are different level of hashes, passwords, algorithm applied for it. But within this cloud Azure Active Directory mechanism, how the synchronization over here would happen is, let's say your mailbox is actually in Office 365, okay, and your user is created in the on premises. So the validation and verification would be done on the on-premises side, where you have deployed your on-premises Active Directory, and once the authorization is given, it would then be giving you the access of your mailbox, the one which is hosted in Office 365. So with this being said, your password hashes and all those things would be coming to Office 365, but in a non-encrypted format, not in an encrypted format. Now why I'm saying this is non-encrypted format, because it totally depends, from where you are hosting the application. Let's say on the on premises I have used the AAD Connect tool, and I've told AAD Connect that whichever objects which I would be synchronizing from the local Active Directory to Office 365 using the AAD Connect tool, so I would be responsible for their authentication and authorization, means validation. But there could be some more on premises applications deployed or developed on the on-premises side or on cloud. There, let's say four of the applications have been deployed on the cloud side. So wherever the application would get hosted, and whoever would be responsible for the authentication mechanism, meaning let's say I have a Salesforce application which needs to have its authentication on Office 365, because I do not have any on-premises mechanism for that. So at that time, for that specific device, not device, for that specific application, the authentication would completely be taken care in cloud itself, because I do not have that application deployed or controlled on the on-premises side. So in synchronized identity, what it means is that wherever you would be hosting your application which requires authentication, okay, so wherever the application gets hosted, the authentication mechanism would go there. So since my object is created in local active directory, so the authentication would happen there. Why? Because there's the on-premises AAD connect tool in between. So that is the reason that the authentication would happen in the on-premises for the objects which are coming through the local active directory using AAD connect tool, and the authentication would happen. And for the other Salesforce application, it would again directly come from Office 365 because the application itself is deployed in Office 365. So the authentication, authorization, and validation part would be taken care by the cloud's Office 365 identity as well. So it is like a mixed kind of a scenario. Wherever you have your application or the objects hosted, it would be coming. The authentication would take place then and there itself. Now the third one is the most the most liked ones, I would say, or the most secure way of getting in connected to your features and services. Why? Many of the times you might have seen that you try and enter this URL into your web page, that is microsoftonline.com or outlook.office365.com/owa, portal.office.com, admin.microsoft.com, all these different URLs. And automatically what you feel is, if any one of your domain, let's say my domain is nori12.com, and if that domain would be a federated domain, and the moment I enter this domain in Office 365 by entering the email address as rizwan@nuri12.com, so Office 365 would see, with the help of the Federation server and an SSL certificate, it would see that, I see that this authentication is not being responsible for my part, and automatically it would redirect you to a different page that would be any value of your FQDN, and that would redirect you to an ADFS page, and over there you need to enter your username and password within within the federated identity. So what you would see is, though you have entered the correct URL, that is portal.office.com, but it will still route you to an ADFS page stating that no, you need to enter your details on this page, and once these details are validated, post that I'd be able to give you the services for Office 365 for whichever you have been aligned for. So that is the most reliable way, ADFS, to which it has federated identities, post which it has OAP, that is web application proxy, that when I'll be creating a separate video for that in order to be able to make you understand as if how does web application proxy and federation services works. But in layman terms, just try and understand that whenever we talk about federation services, this is the most secure way, that even if someone tries to attack or tries to fish your complete Office 365 tenant, they'd still be able to they'll not be able to have any access, because the moment they'll try to sue or try to make some fishy attacks on your domain, the each and every time the URLs would get redirected, and since it would not be controllable by the Office 365's cloud mechanism, but yes, the control would be into your limitations and your hands, because you are the one who has designed those federation services, and you are the one who is going to manage it. So any active connections coming into your network behind the firewall, behind the federation services, so unless you are going to allow that connection, you'll not be able to bypass with these chain rules or the claim rules which you have deployed for Office 365. So I'll quickly walk you through how does the federation services work. Whenever a request comes in through a client, when I say client, so it would be the web browser where I would be entering this URL and stuff. So it redirects you to the STS URL. So STS URLs over here are the most important URLs, and those URLs, the FQDN name is also configured into the SSL certificate, which routes you through the global DNS. So what it does is, let's say the moment I would enter Rizwan at moody12.com, which would be a federated domain for Office 365.com. It would not be a synchronized domain, but a federated domain. I also need to get those settings changed using the commands in Office 365 MSL services, so that I need to tell Office 365 that, hey, till the time you were managing this domain, but from now I'm going to manage this domain and all its authentication. So it would be convert hyphen MSL domains from standard to federated. You would need to provide the domain name, and you need to enter the federation key. Okay, so with this way you would be making your domain completely federated, and once it gets federated, so how the request comes in your for any request, till the time you have been able to understand how does cloud identity works, how does a synchronized identity works, but how with Office 365 federated identity. So the moment you enter the domain, so Office 365 would tell that, hey, I am not supposed to be able to authenticate you on this domain. Why? Because nudi12.com is already federated. So it would check that nudi12.com is already federated. So what it would do is, on to that page, because I have deployed an SSL certificate, and within that certificate there would be the FQDN. That would be, let's say I would be creating an FQDN. FQDN is simply the name of a host name plus domain name. So whenever I would be pulling up these services, I always need to keep things in mind that all my federation services or my web services are publicly faced, meaning that internet traffic should be coming onto that server where I am hosting my federation services, or the server where it is standing. So coming through this, I would be deploying that certificate the um, on the federation server itself, which would be containing the FQDN name, which would be pointed to a static public IP, and I would be defining that IP into the global DNS, because how internet would understand that I have to come through this specific server. So the query would go to nudi12.com. Then how of this query, nudi12.com, what it would do is it would check whether this domain nudi12.com exists. So it would say yes, oh yes, this domain is purchased from GoDaddy and nudi12.com does exist. So within nudi12.com, it is going to find the FQDN, that is adfs.nudi12.com. Oh, I see that this A record is being published in nudi12.com, which is pointing to this IP address, which is 10.20.30.40. Okay, so it would then take the query from that ADFS, from that GoDaddy, from that global DNS or external DNS, to that specific IP address, that is my federated server, that is 10.20.30.40, and it would go there and stand up, and it would say, hey, yes, I have a request for you, nori12.com, I'm getting a request for this, and that request should ideally go to Office 365, but Office 365 is actually pointing me to you, and I have, from the global DNS, it sees that I have been managed to get you through this specific IP address. Now what next? So that ADFS server would check, hey, whether I have this nori12.com deployed with me, because it would be a federated server, and federated server has a dependency with the local active directory, because it is a role. The job of a federation server or a service is to generate the token and reply it back if the token is authentic. And again, federation services would not do these things on its own. It would simply check and pass that query to the local active directory, and within local active directory it would say, yes, I do have this domain with me, which is called as nori12.com. So once it checks that yes, the domain is there, okay, within that domain it would try and search for that user, whether Rizwan at nori12 Rizwan exists in nori12.com. Local active directory would check, yes, I do have this user Rizwan at nori12.com. So yes, okay, so if I have this user, just check if the credentials what is entering, the username and the password, are correct. So if the username and password which is being sent from the web browser to DNS, from DNS to SSL certificate to that ADFS server, from ADFS server to local active directory, and it would be doing a Kerberos authentication. If the username and password gets matched, it would be returning that again back to the federation services, that is the ADFS server, and active directory would tell ADFS that I have made a Kerberos a Kerberos algorithm check to this user, and using an LDAP query, what I see is this user exists, and whatever the request is coming from the browser with the username and password, that is absolutely correct. So what needs to be done from federation service is that the federation server AD active directory is going to tell the federation service that, hey, everything looks good, it is a green flag, just generate a token. So the token generation work would be of the federation server, because it would be generating the token with the help of a claim rule. And as soon as Active Directory would tell federation server that please generate the token and pass it across, so that once the token gets generated, so that token would be having the details such as, yes, your authentication and validation verification is successful. Now I am giving this token to you, and this will be valid for 1 day, 2 day, 5 days, or whatever the token is, using SAML token and all the different types of tokens it contains. So it is going to pass on that information to that SSL query, the SSL certificate query. From there it would go to DNS, and from the DNS it would go to the local web browser again, who was the requester, the client, and all these things gets invalidated. The token would be given to that web browser, and with the help of which you would see a keep me signed in option, that would you like to sign in. If the sign in is successful, and with the help of it, then the user would be able to see the services, for whichever services the user would be having access, the user would be seeing that. And with this way, federation services is the most secure channel, or the identity part, which is supported in Office 365 till date. Walking on to the same things, I believe I was explaining you all these things on this same one single slide in over here, but I'm just going to explain you this diagram in over here. So when a user from his PC tries to enter the username and password, you see, user account details goes to cloud identity. It would check this, yes, I have these users username and password, I'll validate this and return it back to you, and automatically this is called as cloud identity. This is the synchronized identity. A user signs in because the user is doing this on the Office 365 portal. The request would go here, the request from there would go to the sync tool, and it would check the user's password against the local on-premises Active Directory. Once it is there, it would return back the hash value to Office 365. The password would still be kept here in the on-premises, but the hash value of that password would be sent across the cloud in every 90 seconds, every 120 seconds, I'm sorry, every 2 minutes. That is the partial value. And once that value gets in passed, the user would be authenticated and validated. And similar to that would be the federated identity. All the process would be the same in over here, but you see in over here, it goes from cloud. The request was gone. I did explain to you about the global DNS server as well. So it would go to the sync server. From sync server it would go to the on-premises, but walking through, it would first go to the ADFS server. The ADFS server would authenticate it against the on-premises Active Directory. Once the authentication is happening, it would send that query back to ADFS, and from ADFS, because a sync is also required, it is a prerequisite, ADFS server cannot run on its own. Those objects would still be kept in synchronization in touch with Office 365. So once these two works hand in hand, automatically the authentication would then be reverted back to Office 365, and this is the way through which it works. And that would be all from my side for this session. I'll not be able to tell you about the ADFS, the federated part, because I had one of my servers getting federated, but it has been quite a while that I've not been able to make use of it. But yes, if you need to check on that, how you can guys check whether you have the Azure AD connect. So if you see in my Dursing server is still on. The last thing which was done was on like 567 days ago. Password synchronization is still turned on, because right now I have each of my objects getting in cloud-based scenarios only. I do not have any of my Exchange servers to be able to run on hybrid or on synced environment. And these are the details which you can easily grasp it or grab it from this portal in over here, wherein it would be giving you the details of your AAD connect, and you can get these details for the synchronization. If you again click on it, see my federation was turned on to some point in some time. Right now it is showing as disabled, okay, but I did enable, if you see, seamless single sign-on, because you cannot do single sign-on without the help of Federation. Right now you can just get it done using pass-through authentication. That is again a different channel, PTS. We'll talk on that sometimes. But I did enable SSO on one of my tenant. It has been still set to enable, and those PAT agents needs to be installed. But yes, all these things are being highly available only when you have your local on-premises Active Directory server, whether it is running behind any virtual machine or any physical server. That things needs to be managed in from your on-premises, because if anything goes down, yes, your complete Office 365 could go down. So you need to be very specific with all these things in a way. So that would be all from my side for this specific session. If you have any things or any such doubts understanding all these three identities, feel free to contact me and we'll get those doubts cleared for you. And if you need to contact us at any point of instance, you can get on with us or at info@alifconsulting.com. Thank you for watching this video, and stay safe and stay healthy. Goodbye. Bye bye.